I would like to let you know that Jackie is the one who came up with this topic and presented it to us for possibility for Connect. And Jackie herself has experienced a redlining in her way back when and still experiencing it today. And I'd like to, everybody I believe knows what the practice of redlining is, a practice of housing discrimination whereby red lines were drawn on housing maps by government officials and banks to designate neighborhoods. And in fact, when Celestia presents, she's going to show us really specifically how it was done in Birmingham. But I'd like Jackie to say a few words about why she wanted this topic to be talked about. Jackie?
Well, thanks, Judy. And Celestia, I'd like to call you Cookie. I love that name. I love both of the names, but
I love Celestia.
but I learned about Cookie's amazing work from my sister Carol Clark, who's on the board of directors at the Birmingham Museum, and she was aware in telling me about Cookie because of my interest and experience with redlining, both beginning with my grandparents, where my grandfather was a co-founder of a financial institution that focused largely on helping homeowners in the Black neighborhoods and communities of Birmingham. They provided the only source for mortgage lending back in the 20s and again in the 40s. So let's fast forward to today or recent times. I'm sure that many of you are aware that the freeway system has went through the middle of the Black community and destroyed a lot of houses, including my grandparents, and a number of other individuals whose names that you'd probably recognize. Fast forward to here today, I currently own a house which I bought in the neighborhood that I grew up in, remodeled it, and recently realized that a house the exact same color, style, it's almost like they came to my house and copied it, but the same floor plan in a different zip code, that house is valued at over $150,000 more. Also, I pay as much insurance on that little 2-bedroom house that I do in the house I'm currently in California. So that's just utterly ridiculous and unbelievable. And when you look at the impact of all of that, it affects so many. It explains an economic disparity that's enormous. So that's my story and experience, and I am just so thrilled that Cookie accepted this invitation, and I've heard nothing but amazing things about her work. And with that, I'm going to be quiet and hope that we all just learn from her amazing work. Thank you so much, Cookie.
Okay. I think you may or may not know, Cookie received both her Bachelor's of Fine Arts in photography and also her Master's of Fine Arts from the University of Alabama. And she's currently an adjunct instructor at the university. She teaches in the Birmingham City Schools, and she has her own private photography studio. And it seems to me from everything I've read about her, and somewhat of what she said, photography is her first, she identifies herself as a photographer, but she's also an artist and a researcher. And I wanted to say something I didn't know until I found this out 2 days ago from her. The Birmingham Museum of Art, where her exhibit was in February, until February, actually purchased her whole Redline exhibit. So it can be seen there permanently. I thought it was just an exhibit and she took it out, but they purchased it. So we're so proud of her for that. So you can see it there. And I guess without further ado, we're going to hold the questions, as Ann said, until the end. We're going to turn it over to Celestia. What a name. Celestia Morgan.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, first of all, thank you all for having me on this evening. I always like to give this disclaimer. I did not study the history of redlining. I am an artist. So my work speaks to my experience and also some of the research that I have gathered to create this work. And I can identify with Jackie, I believe, Bell, about the different layouts, or well, the same layout in different neighborhoods, because my husband and I were actually ready to purchase a home, a new home. We purchased our first home, and we was going to stay here about 5 years, and we was going to build a home. And the same house layout was like 30,000 more in another neighborhood. And we were like, this is just ridiculous. The same company that built the house, same layout, everything, just $35,000 more. It was like, this is ridiculous. So the inflection of, the housing rates are just examples of how people literally saying, we don't want you over here, pretty much, if I could say it in that term or fashion. But I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to start my presentation. My presentation is normally what my artist talk that I give in museums or at colleges as well. So I'm going to show you a couple of slides, and I'm going to start that now. All righty. All right. I hope everybody hear me, because this feels so weird. Me not hearing anybody. All right. All right. So my struggles, my life struggles and experiences help contextualize my artwork. And I always like to start my presentation with one of my best photographs of me as a child at 4 years old. And this picture here just shows how excited I am about what's about to happen the next day. And this is me and my brother. For some reason, his head is chopped off. I believe my dad was the photographer. I don't know what he was doing. But however, we were living on the western side of town. I think maybe you may remember Lom Avenue in Birmingham. So there's the Monroe Villa Apartments. So we're actually moving the next day. So in the background, you can see cardboard boxes on the floor. And I am super excited, like Christmas is tomorrow. My parents were able to purchase their first home, and we were moving. And I was going to have my own room. I didn't have to share it with my brother. And I was super excited about painting my room pink. And I did paint it pink. And now that I'm older, I realized that that was just too much pink in my room. But back at the apartment, see, as a child, playing, we didn't have a yard to play in. So we played in the parking lot. And with the parking lot being full of cars, you would have fear of being hit by a car. But at my new house, I didn't have to worry about that anymore, because we had one of the biggest yards that I have ever seen as a 4-year-old. It was just shy of an acre of land, and there was no worries about getting hit by a car anymore. Little did I know that my new place of solace would become my first memorable encounter of racism. My family was the second Black family to move on this block. In front of my house was a small road that divided my yard from my neighbor's yard. And this street was called 55th Street, Inslee. This is in the Central Park area. I don't know if many of you all know that area or not. You may be familiar with it, but it's in Central Park. And this is the area where I grew up. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the road. But however, that road became very important to me in this work, this body of work. There was no fencing, just a street. And on the opposite side was a Black child's worst nightmare. It was the meanest and racist elderly white man that I have ever met. He would fuss and cuss and use racial slurs when we would play in the yard. And if any of our toys would touch his grass, or balls would touch his grass, he would give them to his dog as a chew toy. At that time, I could never understand the complexities of this issue. His yard was big and green as my yard, and the sky over his house was just as hopeful as the sky over my house. My new neighborhood was supposed to be my sanctuary, my place of solace. No limits, no restrictions, but yet I felt contained. The road 55th Street was no longer just a part of my new address. Visually, it became a metaphorical symbol of fear, separation due to the color of my skin. My personal history and geographical location has a heavy influence in this body of work that I'm about to show you. My relationship to Birmingham is very personal. Both grandparents raised their children here. My parents raised me and my siblings as well. And now my husband and I are raising our 2 children here in Birmingham. And these photographs in Redline explore the racial histories of Birmingham. From the development of Interstate 2059 to the historical residential social maps created by the Homeowners Loan Coalition, the HOLC, during the 1930s on residential mortgages. It's been over 50 years since segregation was outlawed. It's unconstitutional, but its rich history of the civil rights movement is quite prevalent in our city. But the residue of discrimination can be even seen and felt today. Here are 2 books in which I reference to and has heavily influenced my research. One of the books is by Richard Roston, The Most Segregated City, The Color of Law, it's by Richard Roston. And The Most Segregated City in America, the author is Charles Connolly. And in his book, he addresses how city planning and civil rights has a profound influence on one another in Birmingham. And this type of planning is about controlling the land and indirectly implying who gets to live where. According to the HOLC, there are color-coded maps visually displaying displayed to loan officers, appraisals, insurance companies, and real estate professionals on how to evaluate mortgages. These color-coded maps have been found across the US, such as Philadelphia, New Orleans, Minneapolis, and so many more. And yes, Birmingham, Alabama. Now, this map I came across pretty much just doing research online. And it kind of surprised me because the key layout is a little different. And as you see my cursor right here, this is the key layout. And I'm gonna go over it before I give you a closer view of that key layout. So at the top of the key, it says green, which is best, which was considered being a good area, nice, the property you could use to capitalize on. Blue, the area was still desirable or have reached its peak. Yellow, the neighborhood was starting to decline. Red, which is labeled hazardous. Black, low income, whites, Latinx, and Jews. And this area also suffered from environmental and health dangers as well. And here on the Birmingham 1933 postal map, ranking just below red, the color key uses the term in black, Negro concentration. So here's a detailed view of that map. And what kind of struck me on this one is this map was really laid out in handwritten form. You can see the penmanship there. So this was done really intentionally to put Negro concentration. And below that was commercial and undeveloped areas in Birmingham. But beyond the other maps, they weren't labeled as Negro concentration, although a lot of that red is considered that area. But those terms really stood out to me. And as an artist, I wanted to do something about that. So within redlining, one of the pieces I did, I abstracted that piece from the map and I created this panel, which are 5 panels. And I wanted the viewer to actually see the terms clearly and divinely and question where these terms come from. So I had the privilege, to see some of the viewers come in and look at the work. And when they get to that bottom of the color key, you can see the expression on their faces change. So then they wonder exactly where this come from. And then their reference, it comes from this map that I pulled it from. Right. So as a photographer, I started to photograph also the Interstate 2059 almost daily, examining its geometric form and its capability to shift traffic rhythmatically. I was really drawn to its shape and how it moved across the city, and not only that, how it divided the city. So I photographed it to help enhance its historical and metaphorical qualities. Now that the development of the urban freeways and redlining across America is a result of frustration of integrating neighborhoods and suppressing society economic progress, the interstates across America, once again, in other cities like Los Angeles, Seattle, Baltimore, Chicago, and even in Detroit and so many other cities, these interstates was routed straight through low income and middle class neighborhoods and exposed citizens not only to division, but exposed them to noise and pollution. Interstate 2059 in Birmingham is a prime example of this phenomenon. Not only is it being remodeled, the interstate is now creating a larger gap within our city and has isolated some of the communities nearby. Now, I found this image right here very conceptual, so I hope you guys bear with me on this one. So this image is by Richard Long. And I was drawn to this image because of the line making that's in and how he came about creating this line. In this piece, he would walk back and forth from St. Martin's to his home in Bristol's. And he would walk back and forward until the grass was able to lay flat, transforming it into a visual line. Although Long's presence is not there, he leaves an indelible trace alluding to time, motion, and reality, dictating that the fact that Long's past was temporal. This created a dialogue, an unpredictable nature that divides space, similar to the maps we were just looking at. It also questioned who has the power to draw the line. So I start to question who has the power to draw the red lines on these maps across the city. And it also questions where do the lines start and where does the lines end. The marginalized communities of Birmingham geographically have left many people in areas of poverty and hopelessness. As I continue to explore with my camera in hand, I found myself in a documentary mode, wanting to capture the suburbs in the current state. In this home, in this picture here, I found this situation happening too much in my neighborhood. So I started to photographing and wonder why people, seeing the struggle that people are having, trying to pay for a mortgage or even to pay their rent and to live in these homes. And this is something that continues to happen over and over again. So these places are not foreign to me. and neither am I a tourist of these places coming out from another city. This is something that's very familiar to me as I continue to photograph. And I'm also, I started to look at the work of LaTanya B. Frazier, uh, A Hunted Capital. She uses her documentary photography to create a personal narrative of history, of industrialism, uh, and the lack of health care that plagued her home in Pennsylvania. So as I continued to do research with my camera, I started to photograph these abandoned houses to show the past and present of the textural and appealing paints that in the tall grass that indicate negligence that was happening in our city currently. I wanted to confront this subject in a way allowing the viewer to feel as if they were standing right in front of these houses in these areas that they would never explore. I wanted to be similar to Frazier. I wanted the viewer to see the truth, the voice of the truth. I wanted them to stand in the gap. I wanted to stand in the gap for those who could not speak for themselves. I wanted to expose the residue of our histories, but also provide a sense of hope for these communities. And this picture here is Southtown, and I don't know if you guys know what's happening in Southtown at this moment, but I believe they're going to tear these apartments down and raise some new condos, and as well, only a certain percentage of people will be moving back into this area. And we're very concerned about that as well. So this brings me, oh, well, these homes right here is in Inslee. Let me look at these. And I was looking at the history of the row houses in Inslee, where a lot of Blacks stayed within these homes that worked at the plant. And if some of you know the history of Inslee, it floods over there in some of the areas. And this is very close to the Village Creek area. So I go back to this map to take you to my final point and show you the second piece of, well, the third piece of redlining. So photography and maps are very similar. They are both intentional devices created to visually describe a place. Both are drawings, one with light and the others with shapes and pigment. I found myself fascinated with these maps through elements of design, typography, and the use of color, data, and a notion of space and scale. Maps represents us individually, and they define our personal relationships to the world. Many artists are influenced by appropriating the maps in abstract expressionist ways. And these maps I created in redline represent who I am, and it also contextualize my existence within the world. In relation to my childhood memory, I was telling you about earlier on 55th Street, Inslee, I was able to identify with a painter, Bryce Hudson, and this image simply says there, he entitled, "There Goes the Neighborhood." And you can pretty much see what's happening here, where he explains how he was his family was the first Black family to move into a white neighborhood. And with simple geometric forms and shapes, he produces that language visually. So here, I'm not for sure if any of you all have seen this map, but this is a map that I found for the Birmingham Civil Rights Churches map. So each church is labeled that helped participate in the movement on this map. And I looked at it, I think it's dated 1950s. Yes, it's dated 1950. And here I found myself similar to Bryce Hudson. I found myself robbing the authority of the map, stripping it from its original purpose, unmasking it, and conforming it to my own logic. So if you see here, I'm gonna move my cursor around. Here, this is North Birmingham. And this is a detailed image here. And what I have done was created a North Birmingham sky map. And this is original work here. So what I have done was use the African American communities taking from the 1950s civil rights map to the 1930s HOLC map. And I also use GPS the Google mapping system. And I superimpose the outlines over photographs of the blue skies that are particularly from that neighborhood. So this sky that you see behind this layout of North Birmingham is the sky that's taken over exactly North Birmingham. These shapes visually show containment and are used to reference the dark history of redlining, but yet offers a sense of hope for these communities. I see these shapes not only as walls or borders, but even birthmarks labeled, systematically imposed by society. Attorney Slauson, during an interview, he said something that stuck with me even today, where a child grows up should not dictate where he ends up. It becomes a continual cycle within these neighborhoods, and this is Smithfield. If our property value decreases, then our educational system lacks, which brings high dropout rates, crime, poverty, and lack of healthy foods, and food deserts, pretty much. And if you don't have good credit within these areas, you can't purchase a home. You'll be a renter for life. And once again, it takes me back to that conceptual picture I showed you where Richard Long walked back and forth on the grass as it laid down. I get the question, who gets to draw the lines and who dictates where it starts and it ends? Our current president has fueled statements of division within our country. He speaks and discriminates. And he talks heavily about building walls against our borders. But my work questions, what about the walls that we have created within our societies, within our communities, within our education systems, within our healthcare systems, our government officials, even Hollywood and in corporate America? Unfortunately, too many dreams are limited by where they come from and what they look like. In some situations, I find myself contained, once again, just like 55th Street. But I was told as a child that the sky is the limit to what I can have. And in the sky, there are no borders. So after the work was created and displayed at the museum, I'll show you also some installation images. I was able to speak with some architects who came to Birmingham, and we was actually able to talk about the history of redlining and just give them future architects, and just give them an insight of they should not only build for these communities, but have the people in mind as they create new communities. Also, this work has shown at the National Public Housing Museum in Chicago in 2019, alongside some rare color images of Dr. Martin Luther King. So here is a small installation of Redline at the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, where Richard McCabe was the curator. And this exhibition consisted of several photographers across the South. And as you see to the right, you'll see the work on the wall there. And on the table here is the map that I had blown up so everyone can see it. That show also produced a catalog, which can be purchased on Amazon through the museum as well. And also that the following night of that opening, I was able to be on a panel with Romeo Ross, who was an Academy Award nominee, as well as Jared Soares, myself, and Mr. Harris. So we was talking about dismantling photography and how viewing the South, and not only the South, but the urban communities through eyes of not only the blue eyes, but the brown eyes and the brown skin as well. So this was the full opening at the Birmingham Museum of Art, um, with the sky maps on the wall and the color key as well. So that opening was from October 2019 to February 2020. Now the exhibition of redlining was more than just, a red about the exhibition, but oh, I forgot about the public talk. I'm sorry. But here I am on a panel, and maybe a lot of you guys know Miss Odessa. So she's on that panel as well with me. Richard Rice, attorney Richard Rice, who is defending Southtown in Birmingham, and local activist T. Marie King, who is phenomenal as well. And I'll look at this, on the back side of this gallery, towards this way, we have an opportunity where the community can interact with the exhibition. So what makes a neighborhood was one of them. What inspires you about your neighborhood? And another question on another wall was, have you ever been affected by redlining? And the community was able to place these sticky notes on the wall. And it's very exciting and some heartbreaking messages that were placed on this wall of what people have experienced, but what people would like to see within their neighborhoods. So this was more than just the exhibition. We wanted to make sure the community felt that they were part of it. And here are some of the stickers, some details, and you can read those. Redliner has given a name to the stories that I've heard as a child, and the stories were told by my mom and my grandmother of how the highway came through and destroyed. Let's see, I gotta move this out the way, sorry. Destroyed the beautiful neighborhoods named Groveland, where they live, causing them to have to move and to be amongst the first Black families to integrate Woodlawn. So these are stories that we have collected, and we're going to also use them and preserve them and place them on my website as we continue to type them up. Something happened. Okay, there we go. So we also, within the work, we had what makes a neighborhood, and not only were they able to place the sticky notes on the wall, they were able to also to do oral histories and to record their stories of what has happened to them within their community as well. Sorry. So here's a group of students where I teach. Many of these students have never been to the museum a day in their life. So they had the opportunity to come in and see the work. They did not know it was my work. So they were very surprised. And they learned a little something. And they also learned how, the way they may live, what they see every day within these communities. Like I said, it doesn't dictate who they are. They can move out and be successful. And we also want them to let them know that they are somebody. And hearing them say that sometimes that they feel like they're alone in their neighborhood. And one thing that stuck out to me with this group, one young lady was just saying, I just want to get out. I just want to get out. And she was saying she's ready to move from the neighborhood because every night she hears gunshots and she's worried about the safety of herself, her siblings, and her family. So, just to hear these stories from children is something else. And we have to realize that also a lot of these children here live in a food desert. There's no grocery store that's close to where they live. So it is my goal to definitely bring the arts to the community. It may not get them out but it also would be a catalyst to help them think and get their mind off the struggles that they face within these communities. So here we went to Smithfield Community Center to their after school care, and we brought their layout of their the sky maps, and they created sky maps outside with photosensitive paper. So they was able to lay the layout that I created on a sheet of paper and place it out in the sun. And once they came in, they were able to place it into water and see the transformation. And you should have seen their eyes as it lit up. They said, "Oh wow!" You know, at first the paper was just white, and now I see the community in which I live. So after they created these and dipped them in water and dried them off, they were able to frame them and decorate their frames. So not only do they know what their community outline looks like, but now they're proud of where they live, giving them a sense of hope. And one of the students, named Stephen, he's not from America. He's a non-English speaking student. However, he wanted to do an outline of Honduras. And when I realized that redlining not only touched our students here in Birmingham, and it affect people in other cultures as well. So he wanted to lay out Honduras, and from there he uses watercolors for his to represent his home. And that's pretty much it. That's an old slide right there. But the redlining did end on February the 23rd. However, once Judy said again that it is part of the collection, so they will rotate pieces of it. They probably will not show it all together as one piece. But however, hopefully when you get to Birmingham, you'll be able to see it, or maybe redline will be coming to your city. I don't know. But that's it. And if anybody have some questions, I'll go for that.
This is Ann. I just unmuted everybody that didn't mute themselves. So you may still be muted, but you can unmute yourself when you want to talk.
Hey, Celestia.
Yes, sir.
I'm Cecil Guyton. The area where you lived before you moved to the house, and what was it, Monroe Villa?
Yes.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, those apartments were just south of Lime Avenue around 12th Street, right?
Yes, I think it's one block over. I think it's one block over. Yes.
Yeah. So that area is a very historically Black area on the north side of Lime Avenue. So there are two neighborhoods there. One is Princeton, which is just west of the hospital and north of Lime Avenue. It's a very small community. The other one was Rising, which was just west of where the ballpark was.
Yes.
So that neighborhood is very dear to my heart. It's where my mother and her family lived, and also my uncle and my uncle's parents lived in that neighborhood. My family actually owns a house in that community right now. And I don't know if you studied the history of that area.
I have not.
Yeah, it's a very intriguing story, because it is definitely, if you look at where those boundaries were, so like 3rd Avenue, north of 3rd Avenue, which is where Bush Hill is now, that was segregated. That was all white.
Yes.
And then where you lived was also all white. So everything south of Lime Avenue. So these two Black communities were squeezed in between two very large white communities. And historically, that you talked about Village Creek.
Yes.
Village Creek ran right through that neighborhood.
Yes.
And at that time, Village Creek was actually, now it's a creek, and, because the EPA sued Jefferson County and they had to do some other things, but back in the 40s and the 50s, that was an open sewer. And that's where we lived.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. You kind of like living right next to Black history.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to piggyback off of Cecil.
Yeah.
That's the neighborhood I grew up in, West Princeton.
Yeah. Well,
So I'm very familiar, yes, very familiar, that Lom Avenue separated the Black neighborhoods
Right.
from the white
Right.
West End, yes.
Yeah, that neighborhood is very dear to my family.
Deborah, I would be interested in what led you to want to explore redlining. I mean, I heard in terms of the impact of your moving into your house in Central Park. Was there?
Well,
And I'd love to hear more about your experience of living there.
okay. Well, I didn't know about redlining when I was moving into Central Park. So that was like my childhood home. I started to dig deeper into it when I got married and we were ready to purchase our first home. To be honest, as a child, you know, you growing up, you know, white people live here, Black people live here, you know, but I didn't know it was intentionally and by the government, you know, to separate us, you know. So as I started to dig into just my history of where my family lived across the city, I did a project, it's actually behind me, called Passage, where I went to different communities and houses where my family lived in Birmingham. And some of these houses are in Smithfield, West End. And I just went and looked at my aunts and uncles' birth certificates, and I pulled up those addresses, and I went into those neighborhoods, and I just knew something was not right, and I always questioned why that my grandmother always lived in a certain area. Why did she move up the street to a new house? I mean, she was very poor, but Smithfield was her area. She would move up the block because the house had another bedroom, because she had 16 kids. So it had an extra bedroom. So she was relieved from a little, you know, a little stress in in the room. So I was like thinking, and as I started to dig more into the history, looking into Birmingham, I start to come across the history of redlining. Now, like I said, I gave a disclaimer at the beginning that I did not start out just saying, hey, I'm gonna do something on redlining.
Sure.
It just was like, hey, why am I struggling? My husband is working hard. The schools that we live in now are failing, and I don't want my children to go to these schools. Why do it feels like we have to work extra hard to move into a certain area? And that's when I came across this history.
Thank you.
Can I ask you another question? What area do you live in now?
Currently, I'm in Center Point area. It's right on the skirts of between the city of Center Point and Birmingham.
Yeah, I know exactly.
Yeah.
I grew up in Birmingham, so
Yes,
those areas were historically white areas.
Yes.
You know, and if you talk to, say, like someone maybe older than your parents, they could tell you how 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to move into that neighborhood. Yeah, that neighborhood was predominantly white. Now,
I remember growing up and actually coming over this way to shop.
Right.
And now it's nothing here at all.
No.
Yeah. And when we shop, we have to go to Trustful, actually.
And speaking of Southtown and how you said they were tearing down Southtown, I don't know if you've seen what they done to Loveland Village.
Yes, I have.
The same thing is happening there. And what's happening is the University of Alabama is coming into there. I can't tell you, I have homes in those areas. I probably get 10 phone calls a week or emails a week, people wanting to buy the property.
Purchase it. Yeah. And it just feels like now, with what's happening in Birmingham, everything around that hospital, downtown Birmingham, it's like I always say redlining and gentrification, they're cousins. They're first cousins. Yeah. So, it's like we're moving everybody out to the eastern side and, the western side. So it's I always think it's like when you have company and you clean up and you put everything in one room. So when the company comes, they don't see it.
Right.
So you can come to Birmingham and not see these communities falling apart, and you wouldn't even really care. And that's what it seems like is happening.
Yeah, UAB is trying to buy up everything west of where Memorial Park is now.
Yes.
Citizenville. I mean, they're buying up everything.
Yes. Yes.
So I also appreciated you talking about the way the freeway interstate system,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm remembering that it was called urban renewal,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and in the African American community, it was called urban removal,
Removal.
and that's still going on. So I appreciated you talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
I love the symbolism of that diagram of the neighborhood against the sky,
Mm-hmm.
which, reminds one of especially children. I like that they saw that and they got the point of that, which is even though you have a sense of place in your neighborhood and that's where you're comfortable, the sky is your limit.
Mm-hmm.
And they need that contrast to understand that.
Yes.
Beautiful job with the kids.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I don't know if we all remember the ones that attended the retreat here in Birmingham a couple of years ago, almost 2 years ago. We did an exercise where we had to actually pin colored sticky notes on the wall of a map. And I don't know, Anne, you presented that, and it, just seeing your display, Cookie, of how you had the different color stick notes, it reminded me we did that almost 2 years ago with our first retreat.
Oh, wow.
And the blacks were the colors that we had to put on that map. It signified the redlining, to us then what had actually happened with all of us growing up in Birmingham during the 60s.
Oh, wow.
That's true, Veronica. I have a photo of that map after you put your stickies on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to know that she, would use that same analogy, it's just ironic.
I love what you did with the notes and the interaction in your exhibit. And I think those will be very important.
Oh, yeah.
Very important to those people.
Yes. I
Very.
tried to get, I sent out a little invitation for the mayor to come. He did come to the talk. He was there. But I tried to get him to come and look at the sticky notes because they weren't all complaints. There was like, what I like about my neighborhood, and this would even make it better, and if I didn't get a response, but, hopefully one day I could get that information to him. But I realized after this exhibition, a lot of things did change, and I don't know if it was the work or it's just something on his list, but even if I could just drop a seed in somebody's ear, it feels that I have accomplished what I needed to have accomplished. I did not expect this work to be in a museum. I just wanted to get, I guess, a release out. And it was for me first before I could say it was for the public.
Celestia, I think you have a real future ahead of you. I really do.
Thank you.
I think you're a very bright woman.
Thank you.
We're very honored to have you. Very honored to have you tonight.
Thank you.
I also wanted to go ahead, Anne.
Oh, well, I've been hearing actually from a friend of mine in New York who's been involved. He works in planning and stuff with these plans to make kiosks for the farmers market underneath the Interstate 2059. And I was just thinking that somehow I would love to put your work in touch with him, because I think the kind of documentation that you're doing of how the interstate divided the city, and yet now maybe what they're trying to do is make it a more vibrant center. I don't know. I was just thinking about that work. I was wondering if you knew anything about it or how I could maybe, you know, put
Is
people
that part
in
of
touch.
John? You said in what city?
In
Is in
Birmingham.
Birmingham. Is it part of Jones Valley Forum? Do you know?
I don't know. I mean, my friend is Charles McKinney, and he was telling me he was just invited down to look at these um, designs that they were doing
Okay.
for kiosks for the markets that are going to go underneath, you know, the underpasses of the
Underpass,
interstate
yes.
downtown.
Okay. And that's another concern as well. Once again, a lot of people in these surrounding communities, like on the other side of the tracks of the Avondale,
Mhm.
because that's pretty much segregated because of the railroad track. Across the track, you get internet, other side you don't. Across the track, you have vegetables, nice fancy restaurants. The other side, you don't. So,
And
yeah,
historically, those two areas were segregated.
yes, and
Mhm.
it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, those
Yeah.
tracks, see, Hayes High School was on the north
Yes.
side of those tracks,
Mhm.
Avondale and Avondale Park, which we were not allowed to go to. You
Yeah.
know, that was the white area of that area. You know,
Yeah, and they plan to do the same thing with that apartments. Is it Tom Bradford, I think. Those projects over there. They
Yeah.
plan to do the same thing they did with Lovin Village and what they're going to do at Southtown as well.
Well, I'll tell you something that I've
Mhm.
noticed. You know, there was a redesign of 2059, and in that redesign, if you're coming in from east of the city,
Mhm.
there are no exits for downtown.
Yes, there are none at all.
I thought that
You
that
are right.
Yeah.
And that is, and that goes back to history, doing the same
Yeah, it
thing
does.
all
It
over the.
does.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
we're repeating ourselves.
Yeah.
We're just using a different lingo
Yeah. Yeah.
and more modern technology, you know?
There's absolutely not one exit for downtown.
Yeah.
Coming from east
cannot.
to west. Yeah.
Yeah. And to
So
go
I'd
back
like
to that,
to raise
Cecil,
another
would you say that again?
possible.
I want to make sure I'm hearing what you're saying. Will you say that again?
Okay. So she was photographing Interstate 2059. And
Right.
so 2059 runs east and west through the center of Birmingham. So
Right.
if you're going east on 2059, there are a number of exits in the downtown area. I think you can get off on 17th Street and
Right.
maybe 1st Street. But
Right.
if you're coming east to west, the exit, which would have been the exit for Norwood,
Mhm.
is the last exit that you can exit and get to downtown if you're going west.
Yeah.
On that same, there are no exits for downtown on 2059.
Wow.
There isn't even an exit at the Civic Center.
No, yeah.
Mm-mm.
So they have created that because that new stadium's supposed to come over there, right where Top Golf is.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was going to mention that another possible redlining issue that maybe particularly those of you who live or own property or still have family in Birmingham should pay attention to has to do with the cell towers and the 5G reception. On the one hand, it appears that it's bringing to underserved communities better Wi-Fi access.
Oh, yeah.
But the cell phone towers, there's a lot of data and research being done about the consequences of health implications and radiation and being targeted in heavily Black populated areas. So I would say that that's certainly something to pay attention to in all over in various communities all over the nation.
Yeah. And COVID-19 has really exposed a lot of lack in these areas. Yeah. Especially with technology.
We could say it's the modern day Village Creek phenomenon.
Charlotte, will you say
I like
more
that.
about that?
Well, Village Creek, as I heard Cecil Guyton talking about how it ran, and Celestial about how it ran through those particular areas. And then I remembered that it ran through our area. And I had no idea it stretched so far.
Mm-hmm.
It runs all the
Oh,
way
yeah.
through. The thing is that in most of the white areas, it was covered. It was underground. When it ran through where the young lady who said she grew up in Princeton,
Mm-hmm.
Princeton,
West Princeton.
right, all the way through Princeton and all the way through Rising, that was an open area, and live sewage, raw sewage went through that. You know.
Oh,
Yeah. And when it rained, it's overflow. Yeah.
With snakes and all kinds of things.
Everything.
So on that map, it would probably show as a gray, dark colored area right along Village Creek.
Yes.
Right. Now
Yeah,
they've covered Village Creek now. It's covered. But
No,
back in the 40s and the 50s,
In some areas,
open.
it is.
It's
some
still,
areas it's still open, but
it's open.
not. I used to work in environmental services, right?
Mhm.
So if you remember, there was a huge criminal court case that involved a lot of the city of Birmingham public officials. One of them was Chris McNair, who was the father of Denise McNair. And at that time, Chris, who was a photographer, Chris was president of the environmental board of the Jefferson County Commission. And what happened was the EPA mandated that the city of Birmingham redo their sewer project, redo their sewer. So they mandated it, and through that, there was a lot of graft. But that's when a lot of that stuff got closed up and a lot of things got changed where raw sewage wasn't coming through. And that was back in the 80s. That wasn't done until the 80s.
Well, in that neighborhood that I grew up in West Princeton, the city declared that entire area a flood zone.
Yeah.
And a lot of the homeowners, they ended up selling their homes to the city because they had lived in such, we didn't know. So when it did rain, that creek would overflow into the actual neighborhoods and into the yards. Yeah.
Justice Thomas, which probably most of you are, including me, are not a fan of, but he was interviewed on PBS and he talked about a similar thing when he grew up in Savannah, and there was open sewage in the neighborhood where he lived, and he had to, walk across boards, not to be walking, because it would overflow and flood. And he was so happy to go move in with his grandparents that didn't live in that neighborhood. But you see that obviously, you see the pattern.
Yeah.
That was real common in black neighborhoods back in the 40s and the 50s. Real common.
The other thing I was...
And just think if black families didn't have to salvage their homes at flood zone values, maybe their children wouldn't be saddled with student loan debt. They'd probably be able to send their kids to college.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Is it
Cookie, are you familiar with there's a 3-part video series called Race the Power of an Illusion?
Race the Power of Illusion.
Yeah, and the third film in that series talks about the house we live in, and it's a history of redlining throughout this country. And so I just lift that up because it shares what you have shared and how that plays out across the United States. So the series is called Race the Power of an Illusion, and the third film in that series is The House We Live In.
I don't know.
You're holding up something. Cecil, what do you got?
That's the series that she's talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm going to jump in just to...
It really reinforces what you're saying. And so I just offer that up for folks who want to do a deeper dive.
What streaming service?
It doesn't, let me read it.
It's not a streaming service, but it's Race the Power of an Illusion. You can find it on the internet. Sometimes you can get it for free. Sometimes you have to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
But I would definitely encourage looking at that third in the series of The House We Live In.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm going to pop in to give another comment on a short video that Deborah told me about too. But before I do that, I think Susan Siegel was trying to say something.
Yeah, I was going to mention, I don't know, is it Jackie or Jacqueline?
Jackie.
Jackie. Okay. You mentioned the insurance comparison between your 2-bedroom house in Birmingham and LA, which is crazy. And as you said, and I was talking to my husband about it because he is, he works with, does community development work. And so to me, that something should be done about this. Should be able to be a way to bring a class action suit against I'm a lawyer, as you can tell, against the insurance company that's charging that much in Birmingham. And by you have the very comparison. Just because you happen to have a similar house, it jumps out at you in LA. Can I ask you, do you rent your house out in Birmingham, or is that just a second home for you?
It's a second home.
Because I was asking, that makes you a better plaintiff because it's more sympathetic, than a landlord. So anyway, I'm going to talk to him about that and see if he can pursue anything with some of the NGOs that, do this kind of work, because that just seems clearly wrong and discriminatory.
Yeah, the same thing is true for autos and
Oh yeah.
it's not so much. I mean, the notable issue here is that I equated to my neighbors being overcharged in Birmingham and not even recognizing it. They've adjusted, they've become used to it. Mm-hmm. It's a cost of living, mm-hmm. But even the auto insurance, it's just, it's inequitable.
Yeah, I think if they can show that, more cars are stolen or, then they can justify it by the neighborhood that way. But how, and I don't know if they can show that or not. But for houses, what's
disparity is important.
I had a neighbor ask me this question: Do white people, are they just as likely to fall asleep in a drive-through at Wendy's than black people?
Right.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
I'm sure
the disparities are historic. I was watching a piece on the Tulsa race riots just the other day, and one of the things that they said is that even though that community was a very, very impoverished community, it was not impoverished at all. Some of the most wealthiest black people in the country lived in that community. And after the community was burned down, none of the insurance companies honored the insurance. None of them.
Yeah, I heard that too. It was because it was called a riot rather than a massacre.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. I did want to bring this discussion of redlining back to something that Jackie mentioned about the bigger picture, other things that are affected by segregated housing. And that was really brought home by this 6-minute video that Deborah Walker sent to me, and I just put up on the kids' Facebook page. One of the hosts of Code Switch on NPR put this together, and I've heard him say this before, that he brings everything about racial injustice in our country back to segregated housing. And in this little video, he demonstrates that segregated housing is the cause of, it's in school, it's in health, it's in wealth, and it's in policing. So all these things that the nation is looking at right now really can come back to redlining.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And none of even the more, liberal administrations don't address it because it's so big, that they don't even know where to start. And, the money involved, but that's the thing that I've always felt like that's where the money needs to go. And the programs need to go to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Celestia, I don't know if
I recognize I'm an elder in this. I figure you're at least 20 years younger than me.
That's okay.
And that you have a different lens from those of us who are 1960s babies or kids. What would you want from us, what would you say to us in terms of continuing this work? Because it is about social and racial justice. What would you want us to know and to do?
Oh, wow. As thinking about how, the group of children again, the ones that I actually have in my hand, or I would say in my care, they hear you all's story, but it's brushed off very easily because they can't identify. But I guess it just feels like there's a generational gap when it comes to things of this nature. I'm wondering that can they realize, or do they see that the same things are happening to them, their struggles are happening to them, And I think that's kind of happened. They see that now because of what's happening in America with police violence. They see, oh, okay, my grandmother marched for this a long time ago, and now, we're marching for this too, So I think just comparing the stories now, and I think this is a I hate to say awesome opportunity, but an opportunity to bring these stories back and to just have these dialogues with our younger generation.
Well,
And
Celestia,
I believe they will hear it, and they can also articulate that and identify with what you have gone through and what I have gone through and what they're going through now, and and how their future can look brighter than what they see today.
well, right on this call, you have Veronica Jackson, who lives in Birmingham. Many of us are scattered across the country, but we have a lot of folks who also live in Birmingham and would be happy to come talk with your school groups or other groups.
Yes.
So just write to us and we can connect you.
Awesome.
Yes.
That'll be great.
And Deborah,
That'll be great.
thank you for
Yes,
raising
this
that.
is,
That's a good
Charles
point.
Guyton,
I would be more than
and the residents
honored to do
3711
that.
Avenue Southwest.
I mean,
just
and
got a
that's
call
my
from one of my neighbors. I'm actually
my
working out of town.
People, we hear you
And
talking
he
on
says
the
that there's
phone.
somebody in
I'm
the
going to
house.
mute the man.
It's the
There you go.
Okay. But I mean, that is my biggest thing. A lot of artists ask me, Celestia, how did you get your work in the museum? And that is very hard for me to respond to that or answer that question. And sometimes I think I'm holding something back so they won't go ahead, but that's not the issue. But all the work that I produce comes from a personal place, and I'm passionate about it. So people see my passion within my work. The work is not just for me to be famous. Like I said, I go and talk to these children and tell them about it, and my goal is to, like I said, just bring awareness. I can't fix it. I'm not a politician, but I want you to hear my voice. My work, my photography is a catalyst to get that information across. And if I can bring somebody along with me when I'm connected to a group of students, say, hey, I know somebody who can, let's talk about this, in a different perspective. To me, the work redlining is taking its course. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's accomplishing in that. So that's how I feel as an artist. Like I said, I don't just make work to make work. I want it to accomplish something. I want it to make a social change within, if it's even just in Birmingham. Let's start here first, and then I move out. So yeah, that's very important to me as an artist.
Judy Toxie, did I lose you? Well, I think I'm just going to take this moment to thank you so much, Celestia, and congratulate you on that amazing work, because you've made things of beauty that help us to focus on what matters. And like you said, bring people along. So we're truly honored to have you with us this evening. Yes, thank you. And there were some chats that we didn't get to, so I'll make sure that you get. maybe you can take a peek before we log off
Okay.
at the chats. And I'll say thank you and good evening to
Thank
everybody.
you.
Tell Zoe bye.
Goodbye,
I will.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much. Let's be in touch.
Yes, thank you.
Send her my information, Ann. Thank you.
Yes. That was Veronica?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I will do that.
Okay.